ghostly tale is based on true stories from the Wiregrass hauntings. It is but a few of the stories from inside the infamous Pauly Jail in Union Springs, Alabama. It is a Gothic-style building with castle-like features made of red brick. On the inside, it is cage-like. There is even a lion's cage in the backyard, which was used for the transport of inmates. Crime doesn't pay is the popular phrase, yet criminals seem to thrive all the time. Still, we do our best to keep the criminals incarcerated. This is done with the hope of creating a more peaceful and just society. Jails, prisons, or rather the prison system itself, is far from perfect. There are so many prisoners wrongly accused and incarcerated. Injustices in our laws and the culture of our cruelty ends up creating other kinds of criminals within the jail walls. And then, occasionally, there are ghosts. Jails are a place that houses both violent criminals and sometimes the innocent. Stories of ghosts are inevitable to spring from the depressing situation that goes along with incarceration. Is it any surprise that there is an old jail in Alabama famous for such a thing? The old Bullock County Jail, aka Pauly Jail in Union Springs, Alabama, is one such jail. It's one of the longest standing jails in the state. However, these days it serves as a museum, and on one occasion was used as a set for a motion picture. The hauntings have garnered enough attention to have been featured on an episode of the reality TV show Ghost Asylum. The jail was also used as one of the sets for the 2006 film Heaven's Fall to help capture the feel of that particular period. Now, people tour the place either as a museum or in the hopes of seeing one of the many ghosts that haunt the cells. It is a building with a long legacy that stands alongside the many famous ghost stories of the American South, and particularly those of Alabama. The Pauly Jail is just one of the oldest jails in the state that is still standing. Why does the Pauly Jail still stand? Perhaps because it has to. Pauly Jail stands in a town that stays very close to its history. Union Springs and the entire state of Alabama has a rich history steeped in mystery and intrigue about ghostly figures. More than that, it has a history of living people who are just as fascinating. A town like Union Springs has deeper connections to its history than most. The importance of citizens to have physical reminders of the jail's past is no surprise. By visiting the jail, people risk being haunted by apparitions. However, whether or not ghosts themselves are real, the past we encounter in it is undeniably real. It is not the ghosts that make the jail stand. It is us. We know it is important for it to remain in existence. If not for the simple reason it is a part of our history. But having it remain intact, it reminds us of how important the past is and how it can touch us today. Even if you're not a believer in the supernatural, there's something in the history of Pauly Jail that reminds us of what the past was like. It's not simply just a tourist location, it's a reminder of how the world has changed. But what makes the Pauly Jail so special? There are many prisons and jails in America's history. Many have violent stories, and the ones with the larger populations would no doubt have more of those stories. Within the walls of these jails are without a doubt the most horrific criminals and the worst aspects of humanity. Is it the violent circumstances of a jail which fuels these stories? If so, wouldn't every jail in the country have a wealth of ghost stories? Most of those ghost stories are fueled by murders, serial killers, and innocent men sent to death row. Wouldn't the entire country be filled with similar famous jailhouse tales with horrifying apparitions? We need to see what makes the Pauly Jail unique in this by diving into its history. We can discover more of the details, really learn the reasons why this particular jail became so popular for its ghost stories. Furthermore, by finding out the truth of this jailhouse, we are closer to learning the truth of the ghost stories. This will allow us to separate the credible from the preposterous, making those ghost stories all the more evocative. Tread carefully as you delve into the stories of this jailhouse. It is not intended for the weak or faint of heart. The stories we are about to share with you are vivid and may cause nightmares. The first ghost story we want to introduce is J.W. Mann. This tale is about an average man whose only crime was that he drank too much. We want to talk about him first because he is the most recent of the prisoners at the Pauly Jail to become a ghost. His incarceration and death both occurred in 1960. It was Christmas Eve in Union Springs. J.W. Mann was doing a little too much celebrating. Drinking over his limit and feeling a little more than tipsy, Mr. Mann decided it was time to call it a night. He headed home to a wife who was fed up with his coming home drunk almost every single night. When he arrived home, his wife, Ora Mann, was angry because he was drunk yet again. She decided to take a stand and called the local police department to come and arrest him. Up until the day she passed away, 48 long years later, Mrs. Mann regretted this action. The officers arresting J.W. Mann took him to the Pauly Jail and put him in a cell on the second floor to sleep off his extreme inebriation. During that time, this was a popular solution for drunk and disorderly behavior. Unfortunately, in Mann's case, it was not a part of his destiny to see the morning light of sobriety. It has been the assumption that he brought some cigarettes with him into his cell. Being Christmas Eve, the guards failed to search him correctly. They must have been in a hurry to get off work and to their families. In their haste to get home, they missed this. Or perhaps they didn't even search him at all. Mann needed a quick smoke. He lit a cigarette and fell asleep with it still lit. As a result, the bed smoldered with Mann in it. Unfortunately, this was the cause for his untimely demise. He died of smoke inhalation. The next morning, when the guard came to wake up Mann, he noticed the mattress was completely demolished. J.W. Mann was also lying on the smoldered bed, dead. There were no guards working at the time to smell the smoke or hear a man screaming from the third floor. Smoke billowed everywhere throughout the third floor and left a black mark on the jail that still stains the building to this day. Beyond these burn markings, there was no other extensive damage to the jail. It seems like the idea to construct the jail out of concrete was a smart idea. Miraculously, despite smoke filling the entire floor, no one else suffocated or burned. Oddly enough, Mr. Mann was the only reported death that night. The tale of J.W. Mann sheds real light on the more horrific aspects of our nation's history. Mann's story can appear to be somewhat ludicrous. The actual vision of the smoldering mattress and a man dying in the middle of the night would be a horrifying sight to imagine, let alone to see. To say nothing of how it would be a violent, loud, and painful way for one's life to come to an end. Such a violent and unpleasant death might even have left some sort of spiritual impression. It's said that Mann still haunts the jail as well, and on Christmas night people can smell cigarette smoke in the jail cell. Sometimes visitors even report that they have seen him. It seems like Mann is still jonesing for a drink, even in death. You'd think that after what happened to him, Mann would have learned to quit drinking and smoking. Alas, it seems that some people never learn from their mistakes, even in death. J.W. Mann's grandson is T.J. Brooks of Montgomery, Alabama. Mr. Brooks joined the Web Paranormal group when they completed a tour of the Pauly Jail during October 2018. On the night that Mr. Brooks joined the Web Paranormal group during their investigation of the jail, he brought with him an old pocket knife that once belonged to his grandfather. The knife was used as a trigger object to encourage the ghost of Mr. Mann to respond. James Brooks' grandmother was J.W. Mann's wife, Ora Mann, and she was born November 9th, 1913, and lived to be almost 95 years old, and she lived 48 years as his widow. She passed away on July 9th, 2008. She's buried next to her husband in Bethesda Church Cemetery in Barber County, Alabama. Ora Mann never forgave herself for turning her husband into the police. She did so in an effort to teach him a lesson about coming home drunk. Mrs. Mann often told family and friends if she hadn't done what she did, perhaps he'd still be alive and with her and James Brooks. J.W. Mann was born October 11th, 1911, and his tragic death was on 12/24/1960. He was only 49 years old. His body is resting in Barber County, Alabama, in Bethesda Church Cemetery next to his wife. However, his soul may be forever trapped at Pauly Jail.
Do you know what they're feeling? Are you hurting where you are now?
I feel like his body.
I'm gonna move it.
Do you think your wife was sad that she did what she did leaving you here?
I'm getting a really vivid visual of, I guess, him gasping.
Were you on the lower bunk?
One of the legends of Bullock County and the Pauly Jail is the one about an inmate named Aberdeen Johnson. This Pauly Jail inmate was accused, tried, convicted, and even executed by the angry mob for the criminal assault of Mrs. John Butts. He was never legally tried before a court and jury. It is said that he committed this crime in front of Mrs. Butts' two small children, 33 miles away from Union Springs, Alabama, in Crenshaw County near the Pike County line. This may not seem like a great distance as of today, but this was before the car really boomed. The Model T had only been recently invented, and it was unlikely that Johnson would have had access to one. He had been chased into the forest by Sheriff P.W. Ginwright and Sheriff Deputy Guy Rich. Aberdeen Johnson was shot in the face and neck with birdshot prior to being captured. This made it easier to identify him because of his injuries. Once captured, he was taken to the Pauly Jail. He was to be held until he was taken back to Bullock County, where the crime was committed. In his time there, Aberdeen Johnson never once confessed to being guilty of the crime. Whether or not Aberdeen Johnson was truly guilty of sexual assault, we'll never know. Rather than the judgment of the law, what Johnson faced was disproportionate mob violence and a deliberate act of social injustice. It was on a Sunday afternoon, the day before Aberdeen Johnson was to face trial. An angry mob of 6 people assaulted Sheriff Ginwright, locking him up in a cell. This action is also questionable. Did the sheriff allow the mob to handcuff him? Was he actually in agreement with the mob and wanted to appear he too was a victim? The mob then took William Eastman, a local blacksmith, at gunpoint and forced him to use his tools to break through the jail bars. This made it easier for the mob to pull Johnson through the opening made within these bars. The mob proceeded to march Johnson out of the jail, taking him 2 miles away. One person even shot him in the hip along the way. It was possible that the man shot him because he was trying to escape, or due to some sick way to fulfill a sadistic impulse. Another possible reason for the man to shoot at Johnson was pity. Perhaps he felt sorry for him and wanted to put him out of his misery before the mob could further inflict the pain. They made him pause when they approached some railroad tracks. There was some debate amongst the mobsters as to how far to take Johnson. Some members of the group wanted him to experience their mob justice at the scene of the alleged crime. However, Johnson's wound made it difficult for him to walk, and the mob feared reprisal from the soldiers who may be arriving soon on the oncoming train. The decision was made to string up Aberdeen Johnson right beside the railroad tracks in which they had originally stopped. 12 men took him to the tree, and one of the elderly members of the mob tugged the rope up. As the mob hung him by his hands, anyone who wished to could shoot him if they so desired. It is estimated that he was shot approximately 150 times. Perhaps the most chilling part of the whole process was how the news reported justice had been served that day. The Huntsville Daily Times commented on the feelings of sobriety and calm prior to his conviction and imminent execution. Aberdeen Johnson, also known as Jackson Walker, was able to evade several hundred lawmen that formed a posse to search for him. Aberdeen was able to remain on the run for over 7 days, despite being close enough to get shot in the face and neck by birdshot. If Aberdeen Johnson had been shot in the neck and face by birdshot, wouldn't it have slowed him down? Also, these injuries would have made it easy to identify him in a lineup, so why would it be necessary to have someone who knows him prove it was him? Unless, of course, the actual person who committed the crime against Mrs. Butts hadn't been identified yet. Or had there been a crime committed? Was Aberdeen just a victim of circumstance? Had Mrs. Butts really been having an affair with him and her husband suspected something, so she made this tale up? These questions bring up yet another question. The original reward for his capture was $100. However, the governor upped this award to $300. Why did he do this? Was he uncertain Aberdeen was the right person? Did the governor have his own suspicions about the way this case transpired? Perhaps Jackson Walker was more than just an alias for Aberdeen Johnson. He quite possibly was a separate man with his own identity. Maybe even the real person who attacked Mrs. Butts on that day. Possibly everyone got it all wrong and convicted the wrong man, thus allowing the guilty party to go on about his life, get married, and raise a family. All these things, poor Mr. Johnson got stolen away from him without so much as a fair trial. The sheriff in charge of Aberdeen Johnson's custody was P.W. Jenright, elected to his position as sheriff of Bullock County the November prior to Johnson's arrest. It is not clear whether Sheriff Jenright's inexperience prevented him from properly protecting his inmate, or was he actually part of the mob justice and had them handcuff him to appear it was out of his hands? However, just 2 short months following his election into office, he was forced out. This was due to a judgment filed by the Supreme Court stating that he had been careless in his responsibility to watch over Aberdeen Johnson while he was incarcerated and waiting trial. When Aberdeen Johnson had finally been captured in April, somewhere close to Union Springs, Alabama, he had been placed in Sheriff Jenright's jail in Union Springs. Jenright had contacted Governor O'Neill, warning him he feared the prisoner was in danger. The governor then ordered Jenright to keep a watchful eye on Johnson until Governor O'Neill's soldiers could get there to provide necessary protection of this prisoner. However desperate the governor's orders, Jenright was careless in trusting the mobsters when they promised to leave his prisoner alone and they would not harm him. Jenright even allowed some of the deputies in charge of guarding Johnson to leave their posts briefly to go have dinner. While the deputies were gone, the mob snuck inside the jail. They were able to overcome Jenright and handcuff him to the rail of the courthouse just outside his office. With Jenright detained, the mob had easy access to Johnson's cell. They were able to capture him and take him away to serve him some of their own civil injustice. Because there was no real certainty that Aberdeen Johnson had truly been executed, all the reports made by officers and other state officials lacked credibility, to say the least, as to how much truth was behind these tales. Governor Emmett O'Neill placed an increase on the bounty that had been set for the arrest and conviction of Johnson even after a report he had been captured. Following Johnson's untimely lynching by this mob, the governor ordered Jenright to be impeached out of office by the Attorney General in front of the Supreme Court. Friends of the sheriff started circulating petitions throughout the counties of Pike, Crenshaw, Coffee, and Bullock counties. These petitions gathered many signatures which asked the governor to dismiss the impeached charges brought up against Jenright. However, Governor O'Neill told the people presenting these petitions that he was not able to dismiss the impeachment order and it would go to trial. Sheriff Jenright would go to trial the week of May 25, 1911. The Supreme Court ruled that he had been neglectful of his duties, and which then ordered by the court that he be immediately removed from his position. People sympathizing with Jenright claimed that he was just an unsophisticated farmer who was only chosen to his position in office because of his good nature. Had he been apprised to the knowledge of how public office operates, he would have been able to allow Aberdeen Johnson to be captured by the mob and been able to protect his position from impeachment. Aberdeen Johnson's ghost is believed to continue to haunt the Pauly Jail. The reason is simple: he is searching for justice, looking for his chance to prove to the mob and the rest of the town that he was wrongly accused and executed. The last prisoner we will talk about is the unknown man who killed Willie Upshaw. Willie Upshaw was incarcerated in this newly built jail the first year the Pauly Jail was opened officially for business, which was in 1897. There doesn't seem to be any record of what crime actually placed him in jail. The fascinating story about Upshaw is he was successful in escaping from this jail. He literally broke through the wall on the second floor one night. Shortly after his escape, he was murdered by an unknown assailant. The reasons for his murder are also unknown. It could be that his unknown killer was seeking out vengeance for Upshaw's crime. Perhaps they learned of Upshaw's escape and decided to take matters into their own hands. Upshaw's killer was eventually found and put in the very same jail as his victim. It is unknown what was going on in the mind of this killer at the time. Perhaps he had fallen into a state of despair while in jail. Perhaps with Upshaw's death, he felt his work was done. Whatever the reason, the nameless killer hung himself in the jail. It's said because of his suicide. When on the third floor, you can hear creaky, swinging sounds. These noises come from the jail cell in which he hung himself. There have been eyewitness accounts of this nameless murderess wandering around the third floor with a noose around his neck. Whatever he was trying to escape, it's possible he is still trapped within the very jail he wanted to leave. Now that you've heard these 3 infamous ghost stories about Pauly Jail, how about check out the book Prisoners of the Grave? This book is available on Amazon and talks about these 3 ghost stories as well as much more information about life during and after the Civil Rights Movement in 1964.